right, we're going to begin the program. Y'all, please join me in welcoming to the stage. Sean Daniels is a playwright, director, advocate, and person in long-term recovery, and our new anti-stigma director. Sean's work has been seen across Scotland, England, Estonia, and the US. His play, The White Chip, a New York Times critic's pick, just finished running off Broadway. That's a big deal. To this project, he recruited a list of really talented individuals, such as producers: Hank Azaria, Jason Biggs, John Larroquette, Ryan Hampton, and Annalee Ashford, all signed on to be producers of this project. We are honored to have both Alexis and Sean with us today. Let's please give them a hand.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go first and then pass it off to my more talented colleague here. My name is Sean Daniels, and I want to talk for a second about the play that we just mentioned that happened in New York. As Jennifer mentioned, we were very lucky to have a high A-level list of sober celebrities come on to be a part of it. Hank Azaria, John Larroquette, Jason Biggs, Annalee Ashford. And while the show was running, we were very blessed to have a lot of people come see it. Paul Rudd, Edie Falco, Oscar Isaac, Kathy Najimy, Judith Light, and even the Clinton Foundation came and took over an evening. And Chelsea Clinton addressed the audience and handed out Narcan to every single person who was attending there. More importantly to that, while the show was running, we were able to go on MSNBC and talk about it. We were able to go on the Drew Barrymore show and talk about it. And there are plans for it to go to various locations, which is potentially Broadway, potentially London, but specifically because of Judge Williams, it is going to tour to the Sarasota jail system. So amazing that not only does it get to go to all those places, it gets to go elsewhere. So when we talk about, and I loved hearing earlier about thinking outside the box, because when we did the show in New York, after every single performance, somebody would come up and say, "I'm ready to get help. What do I do?" And so at first we were kind of thrown off by that because our actors are very sweet, but they're not trained professionals when it comes to answering that question. And so we very much had to very quickly put up resources, QR codes to 12 different groups for people to be able to find where it is that they could go. And I think what I learned about that, and we tracked it after every single show. And so we thought, like, why is the last thing you do before you decide to get help purchase a $50 theater ticket on a Thursday night and go, right? It doesn't make sense, except that the very first ever AA meeting I went to, I was terrified to go because I thought that once I walked in, everybody in that room would know I was an alcoholic, right? Even though they were all there for the exact same reason, I was terrified because I had internalized the shame so much of what it would be, that I myself was nervous about people finding out. And it wasn't that I was getting the wrong help, it's that I didn't want to get any help because I would have to admit something so much about myself. And so I think in terms of thinking outside the box, when you can go see a piece of art and be moved by it, you're not admitting anything by going to the theater. A lot of people go to the theater, right? You're totally fine walking in. But at the end, after you've seen it, you realize that you're ready to be able to take that step. I was very lucky. I just wrote an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times about the ways that we talk about recovery, and they just contacted us again to say that it just passed, not counting print or other places, about 168,000 individual readers had read it, right? So it begins to show the hunger that is out there. But more importantly than any of that is that I live in Bradenton, Florida, right? Which is, people say it's either the New Jersey of Sarasota or of St. Pete, depending on which way you talk about it. We get a rough lot in Bradenton, but it's okay, right? So it means that we're here invested in our community. And then even more importantly than that, on October 12th, 2011, I wanted to take my own life. I had been out of my mind for months before that. I had just finished up being under home arrest. I had lost my job. My wife had left me. I had blacked out while driving and driven my car directly into a telephone pole. And it had just been the longest time since somebody had smiled to see me coming, that I just knew that there was really so little that I had to offer. And so I was determined to end my life that evening. And before I did it, and I still don't understand why, but I didn't get along with her, but I knew that she would answer. So I called my mother that evening, and she answered, and it's making me a little emotional. My mother is here this afternoon with us to be able to be here. So for whatever you want to believe in, I called my mother as she was walking home from getting her one-year chip from being sober. So I didn't know that because when you're an addict's son, you don't check in a lot about how things are going with other people. So a lot of new news was being given to me on that phone call. And she got me through that evening. She got me into a rehab center in Jacksonville, Florida. And there I met a tremendous group of men who were able to walk me through the science of addiction. And it really changed my mind for it not to be about shame and weakness, but to be about dopamine and neural pathways and genetics and predisposition and all these things that I had never heard about before. In all of my state-ordered AA meetings or detoxes or anything like that, no one had ever talked to me about the science of addiction. No one had ever talked to me about, I always say, like, we're an Irish family with a drinking problem, and everybody laughs, right? Because deep down inside, you already understand genetic predisposition, right? You already understand on a certain level how it works going through it. We know why it's called a paddy wagon. Everybody gets it on a certain level, but we don't make the jump in terms of what does that mean on a daily basis to people that are struggling. Growing up, in our family, we have skin cancer and alcoholism, right? So everybody talks about skin cancer, right? You make sure that you get a dermatologist, you get it checked, and then there's another disease in our family that up until recently was just very quiet about, right? We don't talk. Sometimes you get like a whisper about a weird uncle, but that's about as far as we go. But if you have a mole, whip it out, and the entire family will look at it, and they will give you some advice on what you should do next, right? Because we know as a family how to handle some diseases, except when we've internalized the shame of what it should be. So I grew up in the arts. I'd always worked in the arts, and I really wanted to start, once I got my feet back underneath me, to figure out how can we use the arts to begin to battle addiction? How can we change national narratives? It's also really baked into the arts also, right? Like, if you hear so many people talk about Hemingway, right? Like, the guy put a shotgun in his mouth and killed himself, and everyone's like, yeah, I get it, but beautiful writing, seven-toed cats, so much to love, right? Like, we somehow think that being an artist is part of a destructive bargain, and we somehow believe that to be able to express yourself, it's going to cost you something, right? And when we talk about the arts, and this is something that I feel like the average person doesn't know, right? We are about 4% of the GDP. We are about the size of the airline industry in terms of the number of people that we reach across the country and the number of people there. If any of you are a subscriber to a theater, you know that 6 to 7 times a year, you go and sit in a room with people that are different from you, and you attempt to have your hearts and minds open to different conversations. People look like you, have different experiences, and people that don't look like you have the same experience, right? And then you walk out, and if it's a good play, you talk about it for days to come, and if it's a bad play, you probably talk about it for months to come afterwards, right? But you go out, and conversation happens, right? So there are conversation starters in every community the size of the airline industry across our entire country that are not being utilized in terms of what it is. We have, in the last 5 years, solved the scourge of peanuts in our country, right? If you have a peanut allergy, we are on it. If you get on an airline and say, I have a peanut allergy, Delta will pull every peanut off that. and make an announcement to tell the other people, don't take out the peanuts that you brought because someone on here is struggling, right? So we have the capacity to be able to change how it is that we want. I have so many friends that have struggled through cancer, and I watch in terms of like, when they get the diagnosis, they come into work the next day and they tell everybody, and there is an immediate plan put together full of empathy in terms of what do they need, and people bake for them, and the InShape people run marathons for them, right? And we know how to handle crisis. The difference between peanuts and cancer is that we don't believe that they're a moral failing. We believe that deep down inside, there was nothing they could have done. So we're there for you. And I think even those of us that have lived experience sort of believe that when it comes to addiction, right? We don't even own it as much as we could. We still struggle with what it is for us to be able to own it so that the rest of the community can own it. I think about this a lot. Do you ever think about like why AA meetings work? Like a lot of people go to AA and NA meetings, right? And then they share their story, and then that keeps some people alive, right? So like, why? Why does that possibly work? That's not medicine. That's not science, right? That's not about like taking different pills or exercise or any of the things we are taught. And I think it's because the opposite of addiction is not abstinence, it's community. And when you have that anti-stigma, when you have that share, when you tell a story about your own life and somebody says, that's exactly my story that you just told to me, or someone who doesn't look like you tells a story and you're like, wow, that was actually worse than mine. I feel a little humbled in this moment, right? Somehow that makes it better, right? And so when we talk about anti-stigma efforts, we're not just talking about what it is that will allow other people to help you to get help. Just in that basic idea, it's what could keep people alive. It's that the stigma stops people from connecting with each other. It stops them from making community. I promise everybody in this room that has lived experience at some point separated themselves from as many people as possible so that they could continue using, right? And that shows you right there that deep down inside, your disease knows the best thing to do is to have the smallest community possible for me to continue to work on this. Barack Obama, when he ran for president the first time, was against gay marriage. You cannot say what he said running for president the very first time, even in Florida, and run for city council as a Democrat, right? Why is that? And do we really believe that he was against gay marriage, or do we think that he was being told the national narrative is that you won't be able to hold together all these coalitions if you come out for it, right? So think about that. There is a national narrative that in our lifetime, in 20 years, is profoundly different than it was then, right? So we know narratives can change. There was a great study done on this very issue to say, like, why do we believe what we believe? I just came back from New York, and all of New York smells like weed. You never would have thought that was possible 10 years ago, right? How do we change our belief in the things that we believe, right? And the answer that they came up with was the arts. It's the books that you read, it's the movies that you watch, it's the operas. Ellen comes out, everyone thinks her job is going to be over, right? Magic Johnson comes forward and says he's HIV positive, and everyone cries because he'll be dead in days. He is currently in better shape than I am, right? Modern Family comes out, Will and Grace comes out. Next thing you know, we have changed in terms of what we believe. We all have a different understanding. We understand better the people in our community next to us, right? National narratives can change. Our goal is to, 20 years from now, talk about, at one point it seemed kind of weird for people to come forward and say they were addicted, and for everyone to be like, oh my God, that's right. That was what we thought. Isn't that a little crazy? National narratives can change in our lifetime, but it starts in terms of us taking on that anti-stigma work in terms of what it's doing. So I want to talk just a little bit about what it is that we're doing here at Live Tampa Bay to make sure that those things happen. There's an insert in your program for anybody who wants to. We're recording 200 one-minute videos. And then what we're going to do is that we are going to target those videos to specific zip codes in our area to make sure that if you're online and you're struggling, someone who looks like you is going to tell you that recovery is possible. So please take that and please spread it everywhere. We're also working on how can we do industry-specific HR videos. We have a very sweet group of people, from people that voice Disney princesses to Jim Henson puppeteers to Broadway video designers, working on how do you put together HR videos that people would actually watch. I always joke that I did a show in Cincinnati recently, and before you start, you are required to do 3 things, and that is to watch a video about don't sexually harass people, watch a video about how to be nice to BIPOC leaders, and one about what to do in case of an active shooter, right? And these are the 3 things you need to learn before you can work in Cincinnati. There's nothing about mental health training. There's nothing about encountering somebody who may be having an episode. And, knock on wood, you are so much more likely to encounter that than you are to encounter an active shooter. Right? So it's like we have the possibility to do it. We have all these things. We just don't have these HR mechanisms in place for us to be able to do. Before I pass it on, and then we'll come back a little bit, there's a thing that I always like to steal from Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, who is considered one of the real movers in how we change the way that we talk about HIV. And if you don't know this, because this is like a little inside baseball for the performing arts world, so Reagan didn't want to talk about AIDS at the time. They didn't know what it was. And so the arts community decided they were going to talk about it. And they produced this play called The Normal Heart at the Public Theater. And Larry Kramer, who was the playwright, stood out front of every performance and handed out flyers to everybody that left, so they would understand what it is that this play was about. And then Tony Kushner wrote Angels in America. And in it, he says, at the very end of the show, he says, the task for everyone is no more silent deaths. That's our goal. That's how we change national narratives. We say from today, no more silent deaths. And if we take that and we go forward, and so I challenge that to everybody in this room here, to be able to, as we talk about these numbers, as we talk about ways to think outside the box in terms of how do we address this, that I think as no more silent deaths needs to be at the front of everything that we do.